I never thought a simple question in a locker room would unravel everything I'd spent years carefully constructing. But there I was, standing in my towel, water still dripping from my hair, when Marcus looked directly at me and asked, "Why do you always do that?" I knew exactly what he meant. I'd been doing it for 3 months, ever since he joined our gym. Every single time we ended up changing at the same time, I'd find something fascinating about my locker, or I'd suddenly need to check my phone, or I'd remember I forgot something in my car. Anything to avoid looking in his direction. The honest answer? Because Marcus was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight, and I was terrified that if I looked at him for more than a split second, he'd see right through me. He'd see the truth I'd been hiding from everyone, including myself, for most of my adult life. But I couldn't say that, so instead, I stammered something about respecting people's privacy, which even to my own ears sounded ridiculous. We were in a men's locker room. Everyone was changing. The whole point was that nobody cared. Marcus didn't laugh at my excuse, though. He just nodded slowly, like he was considering something, and then he said, "You know, most guys don't think that hard about it." There was something in his voice, something gentle and knowing, that made my stomach drop. Then he grabbed his gym bag and left, and I stood there feeling like I'd just failed a test I didn't know I was taking. I'd been going to that gym for 5 years. It was a small place, locally owned, the kind where you recognized the regulars and everyone had their unspoken schedules. I was a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday morning guy, 6 a.m. sharp. I liked the routine, the predictability. I liked that I could show up, do my workout, shower, and leave without much interaction beyond a nod or a quick comment about the weather. It was safe, comfortable, exactly what I needed. Then Marcus started coming. Same schedule as me, which I later learned wasn't a coincidence, but at first I assumed it was just bad luck. Or good luck, I couldn't decide which. He was probably in his early 30s, a few years younger than me, with dark hair that was always slightly too long, and these warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He had the kind of body that came from actually enjoying exercise, not from punishing himself in front of a mirror. Strong, but not showy. Real. The first time I saw him, I made the mistake of letting myself look. Really look. He was doing pull-ups, and I watched the way his shoulders moved, the concentration on his face, the slight shake in his arms on the last few reps. Something in my chest shifted, and I recognized the feeling immediately because I'd spent decades trying to ignore it. Want. Pure and simple and terrifying. So I developed my system. I'd time my workouts to finish at different times. I'd take longer water breaks. I'd add extra sets. Anything to avoid being in the locker room with him. But gyms are small worlds, and schedules align despite your best efforts. Within a few weeks, we'd started nodding to each other. Then came the occasional comment. Nice lift. Rough workout, the kind of meaningless guy talk that feels safe because it means nothing, except it started meaning something. At least to me. I found myself looking forward to those brief exchanges. I learned that Marcus worked from home as a graphic designer, that he'd moved to the area 6 months ago, that he had a dry sense of humor and a surprisingly loud laugh. And the more I learned, the more careful I became in the locker room. Because the more I liked him as a person, the more dangerous it felt to let my guard down even for a second. My carefully constructed avoidance worked perfectly until it didn't. Until that morning when he asked me directly, and I realized that my strategy of pretending not to see him was actually making me more visible, not less. I'd been so focused on not being obvious that I'd become the most obvious person in the room. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept replaying the conversation, analyzing his tone, trying to figure out if he was just curious or if he'd figured it out. And what was there to figure out exactly? That I was gay? I'd never said that word out loud about myself. Not once. I'd had relationships with women. I'd even been engaged once, years ago, to a woman named Sarah who deserved so much better than someone who was only half present in the relationship. We'd called it off mutually. Blamed it on timing and career goals, but I knew the real reason. I'd always known. After that, I'd thrown myself into work, into routines, into being the kind of guy who had his life together on paper. Good job in finance, nice apartment, regular gym schedule. I dated occasionally, always women, always casually, always with an exit strategy. I told myself I was just focused on my career, that I wasn't ready for something serious. I became very good at lying to myself. But Marcus had somehow gotten under my skin in a way no one had in years. Maybe it was because I hadn't been expecting it. I'd built my whole life around not expecting it, around not letting it happen, and here it was happening anyway, in the most mundane setting possible. A gym locker room at 6:15 in the morning. The next Thursday, I almost didn't go. I set my alarm, turned it off, stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes, debating whether I could switch to evening workouts. But that felt like running away, and I was tired of running, even if I couldn't quite admit what I was running from. So I went. Marcus was already there, working through his warm-up routine. He saw me come in and raised his hand in greeting, completely normal, like our last conversation hadn't happened. I felt some of the tension leave my shoulders. Maybe I'd been overthinking it. Maybe he'd already forgotten about it. We worked out in our usual parallel orbits, close enough to be aware of each other, but not interacting. I was on the rowing machine when I heard someone call out, "Hey Marcus, you coming to the thing on Saturday?" I glanced over without thinking and saw another regular, a guy named Tom, talking to Marcus by the weight rack. "What thing?" Marcus asked. "Pride event downtown. Bunch of us are going. Should be fun." My hands froze on the rowing handle. I tried to keep my face neutral, to keep rowing like I wasn't listening, but my rhythm had already faltered. "Yeah, definitely," Marcus said. "Thanks for the reminder." They talked for another minute about meeting times and places, and I sat there on the rowing machine, not moving, my mind completely blank except for one thought repeating over and over, "Marcus is gay. Marcus is gay. Marcus is gay," which shouldn't have mattered, which shouldn't have changed anything, except it changed everything. Suddenly, his question from last week took on a completely different meaning. He hadn't been confused by my behavior. He'd been asking because he understood it, because he recognized it, because maybe, possibly, I wasn't as invisible as I thought I was. I finished my workout in a daze and headed to the locker room, where I found Marcus already there, getting his things together. For once, I didn't immediately look away. He caught my eye in the mirror and smiled, just a small quirk of his lips, and something in my chest cracked open. "Hey," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I intended. "Hey yourself?" He closed his locker and turned to face me directly. "You okay? You looked kind of intense out there." I should have said I was fine. I should have made an excuse and left. Instead, I heard myself say, "I overheard Tom talking about pride." Marcus's expression shifted, became more careful. "Yeah. You going?" I shook my head, not trusting my voice. "Not your scene?" he asked, and there was no judgment in it, just genuine curiosity. "I don't know," I admitted. "I've never been." The silence that followed felt heavy with meaning. Marcus studied my face, and I felt completely exposed, like every secret I'd ever kept was written across my skin. "First times can be intense," he said finally, "especially if you go alone." It was an invitation, subtle, careful, leaving me room to back away. But I was so tired of backing away. "Would you want company?" I asked, the words coming out before I could stop them. "I mean, if you wanted someone to go with, for your first time, if that's what this is?" Marcus's face softened. "Is that what this is?" I nodded, not trusting myself to say more. "Then yeah," he said quietly. "I'd like company." We exchanged numbers right there in the locker room, and I felt like I was moving through a dream. This wasn't how I'd imagined this moment, if I'd ever let myself imagine it at all. I'd thought if I ever came out, if I ever admitted the truth, it would be dramatic or devastating or definitive, not this quiet exchange in a place that smelled like chlorine and sweat with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Saturday felt like it was years away and also arriving too fast. I changed my outfit 4 times before settling on jeans and a plain blue t-shirt, trying to look casual while feeling anything but. Marcus had texted me the meeting point, a coffee shop near the parade route, and I got there 20 minutes early because I couldn't stand waiting in my apartment anymore. He showed up right on time, wearing a rainbow bracelet that looked well-worn, comfortable. When he saw me, his whole face lit up, and I realized this was the first time I was seeing him outside the context of the gym. He looked different in natural light, softer somehow, more real. "You made it," he said, and I couldn't tell if he'd been worried I wouldn't show. I made it, I confirmed. We got coffee and walked toward the gathering crowds, and with every step I felt like I was crossing some invisible threshold. The streets were filled with color and music and people, so many people, and at first it was overwhelming. I felt exposed, conspicuous, certain that everyone could tell I didn't belong. But Marcus stayed close, pointing things out, making small comments that didn't require much response. And slowly, gradually, I started to notice things. The couple holding hands who looked like they could be accountants or teachers, the older men with gray hair and matching wedding bands, the families with kids, the sheer ordinary humanity of it all. "You doing okay?" Marcus asked after we'd been walking for a while. I realized I'd been quiet, just taking it all in. "Yeah," I said. "It's just a lot. Want to find somewhere quieter?" I almost said yes, almost took the escape route he was offering. But then I saw a group of people my age, maybe older, laughing and dancing, completely unself-conscious, and something in me shifted. "No," I said, "I want to stay." Marcus smiled like I'd said exactly the right thing. We found a spot on the sidewalk and watched the parade go by, and at some point, without really thinking about it, I moved closer to him until our shoulders were touching. He didn't pull away. Neither did I. Afterward, we ended up at a bar that was packed with people from the parade. It was loud and crowded, and rainbow flags were everywhere, and I should have felt overwhelmed, but instead, I felt something I couldn't quite name. Relief, maybe, or recognition. We found a small table in the back and ordered drinks, and for the first time since I'd known him, we had a real conversation. Not gym small talk, but actual talking. Marcus told me about growing up in a small town, about coming out in college, about the years he spent trying to figure out who he was beyond just being gay. I told him about my engagement, about the careful life I'd built, about how I'd convinced myself that not acknowledging something meant it wasn't real. "But it's always real," Marcus said softly, "whether you acknowledge it or not." "I know," I admitted. "I think I've always known." He reached across the table and put his hand over mine, just for a moment, and the touch sent electricity through my entire body. "So what now?" he asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "This is all new to me, the being honest part." "That's okay. New is good." He pulled his hand back, but his eyes stayed on mine. "And for what it's worth, I think you're brave." I almost laughed. "Brave? I've spent my entire adult life hiding." "Yeah, but you're here now. That takes courage." We stayed until the bar started to empty out, talking about everything and nothing, and when we finally left, the sun was setting and the streets were quieter. Marcus walked me toward the subway station, and we stood there for a moment, neither of us quite ready to say goodbye. "Thank you," I said, "for today, for inviting me." "Thank you for coming." He hesitated, then added, "And for what it's worth, I'm glad you always looked away in the locker room." I raised my eyebrows. "Really?" "Yeah, because it meant you saw me, and that gave me the courage to see you too." We exchanged a look that felt like a promise, and then he hugged me, quick and warm, before heading off in the opposite direction. I stood there, watching him go, feeling like my entire world had shifted on its axis. The next Tuesday, I went to the gym like always, but nothing was the same. When I saw Marcus, we didn't just nod. We talked, we joked, and when we ended up in the locker room together, I didn't look away. I met his eyes in the mirror and smiled, and he smiled back, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. I didn't suddenly become a different person, but I started making small changes. I told my sister first during a phone call where I'd meant to talk about something else entirely, but the words just came out. She cried and said she'd wondered and that she loved me no matter what. Then I told a few close friends, and their reactions ranged from surprise to "we already knew" to complete acceptance. Marcus and I started spending time together outside the gym. Coffee dates that turned into dinner dates that turned into long walks where we talked about our lives and our fears and our hopes. He was patient with me as I navigated this new version of myself, never pushing, always understanding when I needed to take things slow. 3 months after that first Pride, we were having dinner at his apartment when he asked, "So are we doing this? Like, officially?" I knew what he was asking. I knew what it meant to say yes. It meant being visible in a way I'd avoided my whole life. It meant risk and vulnerability and possibly judgment. It also meant being honest, being real, being happy. "Yeah," I said. "We're doing this." He grinned and kissed me, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been before. A year later, we were back at Pride together, but this time I wasn't nervous or overwhelmed. I was just there, holding Marcus's hand in broad daylight, surrounded by thousands of people and feeling completely, perfectly myself. Someone took our picture and later I looked at it on my phone, this image of two guys smiling at the camera, and I barely recognized the person I used to be, the one who couldn't even look at the man he was falling for in a locker room. Marcus caught me looking at the photo. "What are you thinking about?" "About how you asked me why I always looked away," I said, "and how that one question changed everything." He squeezed my hand. "Best question I ever asked." And standing there in the sunlight, surrounded by celebration and joy and the simple freedom of being exactly who I was, I couldn't have agreed more. Sometimes the biggest transformations start with the smallest moments: a question in a locker room, a choice to answer honestly, the courage to finally look.